Super happy to be coming up next with Sitcodes here, known infamously for his John Deere hacks as a Microsoft MVP on the Azure bounties and such. Let's give it up for Sitcodes.
Just going to set my water up. Give me a tick. All right, welcome everyone. Oh, I need the clicker. Yeah. Welcome everyone to Advanced Hardware Hacking with Sitcodes. The actual original title for the talk, I think, was Hacking Hardware Arsenal, but didn't really look good. It's not really palatable. So I think it just got changed to Hardware Hacking or Advanced. But the actual title should be Advanced Introduction. So people that are probably familiar with hardware hacking, it's designed to be like a fill in the gaps style thing. So maybe there's things you don't understand that you've learned, and this will try to fill in those gaps. And this is my LinkedIn. It's not malware, I promise. If you scan the QR code, it's literally just my LinkedIn. So just a quick warning, there are hazards involved with hardware hacking, and depends which sort of, I got these from the OSHA website, I think, and the safety sign, they make OSHA approved stickers and whatnot. But some of these are pretty relevant, especially the 120, 240 volts. If you're doing stuff that plugs into the wall, it can get dangerous, and just do a bit of Googling and stuff before you do it, because if you don't, things can happen. So electric shock. So 10 milliamps is the let go threshold. I got this from OSHA as well. Respiratory paralysis, which is pretty serious. From 40 and actually below that is 30. So you can actually have respiratory and let go at the same time. And then 1500 milliamps or 1.5 amps plus, you've got tissue and organ burning, but that's over time. I'm sure it's not instant. So this is the Microsoft HoloLens. So I just want a quick show of hands. Who here is able to confidently look at that and go, I know where to start? Okay, we got a couple. Who here has absolutely no idea what they're looking at? Who's got some idea? Oh, okay, cool. We've got a bit of a mix. So yeah, this is a good indication for me about the contents of what I'm going to show you today. So hopefully by the end of today, you'll be able to look at that and be like, oh, I can start here, here, here. This is perfect. Like, I know how to identify this. This looks like it's that, and etc. And I'm no joke. You'll actually have that sort of feeling, hopefully by the end. I got that PCB picture. I don't have a HoloLens. I got that online. It's a pretty good photo too, the HoloLens too. And I got that from the FCC documents. Anyone who's familiar with things that emit radio waves, you have to get an FCC ID, and you can actually go onto the FCC website and download the PDFs of everything that you've ever produced. So that's just a hint, by the way. Some people like to scratch their little PCBs. As you can see in the photo earlier, they're pretty dark, and I'll show you a better photo soon about being able to positively identify stuff on the board. So I'm going to show you multiple ways of attack, kind of like a mindset rather than an actual methodology, and it's kind of going to help with how to make cash from bug bounty. So maybe internally it's a little bit different. You're probably going to use it for internal purposes, but for an external researcher such as myself, we got to participate in the bug bounty and submit bugs for cash. Because it's pretty as we showed with the show of hands earlier, a lot of people, it's a bit of a barrier entry, so they kind of don't really understand where to start, and that's what the whole idea of this is. So HoloLens, believe it or not, receives updates monthly, allegedly. So I'm going to show you some essentials for modern hardware hacking, dangers, things that can go wrong, like I showed you earlier, respiratory paralysis, procedural vulnerability discovery, which way or where do I start, or what do I do first, or how do I even look at this, things you can start prior to even getting the device, things you can start from scoping out online. And then also keep in mind that hardware hacking is just like scoping any other traditional bug bounty program, where you go in, check what assets are available, find all the IP addresses. It's the same stuff with hardware. You've got to look at the board, do an inventory. So first thing you want to see is how would you consider how would you actually read data from a running device? And this is relative to a running device. There's also devices that you can do research on when they're switched off from a piece of hardware. And I come up with this graph. So this is like a small graph of hardware hacking is just plugging things in. And then if you got the top, no, you need a Cell A, BGA, rework station, and oscilloscope. And then on the far right, you got the same thing, right? Hardware hacking is just plugging things in. So this graph will come into fruition shortly as well. So it's a running theme for today as well. So you need to intercept the logic of the running device. And I mean like ephemeral logic. I don't mean like logic of bit banging. I just mean like the concept of the device. or just connect to a debug interface that's been left in production. So you'll need one thing above anything else. Like there's one thing you can't make out of paper clips and pins and things like that, and that's something that reads serial. So serial I'll get into shortly, but the thing that you need is a serial transistor logic converter. And there's two things that are pretty common or relevant or a pretty common recurring theme, which is an FT232 or a CH340. And they are USB transistor to transistor logic converters. And if you're already lost, it's fine, we'll get into that. There's two manufacturers that make them, FTDI and that one there, WCH, but no one ever sees the bottom brand because usually there's knockoff chips and it's a big problem. In fact, it's a massive problem. Counterfeit chips are probably the biggest issue with FTDI is that they actually have not enough supply to produce the device or produce the chip, and most people just counterfeit them. And in fact, I've actually got a test for you. So it doesn't look that clear on the screen, but which one of those do you think, just in your head if you want, which one of those do you think is actually counterfeit? And the correct answer is the one on the left is original, apparently. So the one on the right, like honestly, I have no idea which one's which. So, and in fact, I'll show you another example. This is one you can buy online, and it's so counterfeit they scratched it off. So, yeah, you'll find those ones online, very common. This is a whole range of serial converters. You'll notice they've all got similar looking chips. The one on the far right, that's a flat version of it, quad. It's a quad flat, no leads one. Actually, it might have leads. I can't zoom in enough. But this one here is the this small outline one. We'll get into that shortly as well. But these are all exactly the same, like straight up. They're all the same. And if you type in USB TTL or FTDI, you'll get all sorts of them. Like this is a bunch that I've got. This is nowhere near. Well, in fact, the one with the X on it means broken because I've plugged it in the wrong way. And that's one of the pitfalls that you'll come up as well. And that it comes into fruition when you're dealing with expensive hardware because it breaks. So which one of these do you already need? And the answer is any of them. So you can literally go to Amazon or whatever, just type in FTDI, and you'll get a pack of 3 for like $8. So these are all fake, but it's honestly, they don't have enough supply. So there's a story to that one as well. Probably don't have enough time to tell it today, but this is the one this is my favorite one, purple one. I just call it purple MCU UART boy, and it's exactly the same as the one I showed you earlier. It's got 4 sides. It's got the same amount of pins as the long one. It's just in a square now. And it's got the same logo on it, FTDI. Probably fake, but it doesn't really matter. It does everything. 5 volt, 3 volt, JTAG, UART, SPI, I2C. It even does logic analysis, believe it or not. People go out and they'll buy a Saleh or like some sort of other massive logic converter. But you can actually do it with a basic FT230X. So you don't need to actually know what any of those protocols are. You just need to know how to connect to them and find available points on a PCB where you can actually get yourself in there or connect to the logic that's available. The one that I showed you previously, that does everything there. You know, I2C, SPI, like I just mentioned, all that crap. RS-232, 422, which I've never used, 485 a little bit in agriculture, lol. And went too fast. What does it do? So this is pulse view. Who here knows what pulse view is by SIGROC? Okay, sweet. So when you plug in an FT232 chip, does anyone know you can just whip out pulse view and actually bring it up into a logic analysis state? And does anyone know that? Yeah, sweet. The next slide there is actually if you zoom in, I don't know if you can see this, but if you look right up there, there's like little, I'm not going to use a laser, but I will. There's like a little gap there. That's because I've got it on the RX pin. And I'm just sitting there turning it on. I just plugged it in, and whoa, look, it's got serial. So it's actually showing me ups and downs. That's just on-offs, on-offs, on-offs. And if you can sit there and count that, but there's actually programs to do that, by the way. No one actually ever does that by hand. In fact, if you zoom right in, you can actually find the exact on and offs. Now, these are actually averages of a curve, but the program does this for you. Like I said, an attacker will never do that by hand. They will actually get a program to do that. And SIGROC Pulse View, I can't remember what it's called, but it's got a whole bunch of different things. And I actually tried the other day, accidentally clicked on Morse code, and it just started lagging and it crashed. Because it was going to be like a massive alphabetical, yeah. So what you just saw there was exactly what's described in a textbook definition of serial, like ups and downs. And you don't even need to know any of that stuff. Just need to know, because like the computer like I said, the computer does that for you. You just need to know that it goes up and down. And there's another way of doing it with a clock. Now, a clock is literally a clock, right? It just goes up, down, at a certain speed. And this is relevant for devices, serial devices that don't have their own clock, and we'll get into that shortly. And clock is quite literally just a clock. And then they use that to bounce or measure how far the data off. Because if you have a big gap, you can see it on the screen kind of, but there's two types that I just showed you. One without a clock, that's the one that I showed you as well in that little demo, and one with a clock. And it'll come relevant shortly. Synchronous in time, or literally has a clock, right? Which one of those was UART? So I'll give you a second to think about it real quick. Which one of those is UART? And the answer is the top one. So it's universal asynchronous. So that's what asynchronous receiver transmitter. It's a pretty straightforward word. No clock, because it's asynchronous without the clock. So you've got two lines of mode there. You've got one sending data, one receiving data. Now, if I show you that thing that I had before with little ups and downs, you can see exactly what I just showed you from the little diagrammic textbook edition version to an actual live receipt from a chip that's coming off a board. And I just plugged it into a GPS thing and just let it sit there. I didn't actually connect it to anything. And in fact, you'll see I only have one line connected. So I was able to do it with read only. Sometimes you have to power the device up, and you'll actually have to plug in two more wires, the power wire and the ground wire. But actually sometimes you can take away the power wire, because some devices, they have their own power. Generally devices have, external devices, peripherals, and they don't need the power. In some cases, you have to find, it's only read only, so one of the other lines is gone, so you've only got two wires now, and sometimes they get rid of the ground wire too. So you're literally just looking for one little hole on the board, or one pad, or pin, or hole, yeah. And so in this diagram here, that's what I plugged in to show you that thing earlier. You'll notice if I zoom in, I'm only using 3 pins. So RX, and there's the two there which are pretty much blank. But the middle one there was power, the far one's ground. So if I powered that device myself, or even off a battery, even off a wall socket, I would have to obviously tap it down from 120 volts because it would blow up. But if I powered it externally, I would only need 2 lines to actually connect with that device, at least read from it. So what we're getting at here is no clock equals roughly UART. So if it's a pretty basic device, has its own clock, right? That's the difference. If it has its clock, has its own clock, you'll be using UART. And if it has a clock, it's probably SPI, I2C, or something faster than that. And these are the kind of symbols you'll see for clock: CK, CL, SCLK, SCL, SC, SCK. Anything practically with a C in it is probably a clock. And clocks are found on peripherals without clocks. They have the clock line there to tell it what speed to run at. So here's an example of an SPI interface. You don't really need to understand what's going on here, but you might start to recognize what I'm telling you. You've got CS. I'll mention this one quickly. It's called chip select, right? And you'll see in the next screen why. SDI, slave data in. SDO, slave data out. And SCK is clock. So we've got a clock, data in, data out, and a chip select. And a chip select lets you select which peripheral to hang with. So that's literally all it does in some cases, generic cases. And let's do a worked example. This is a common thing that you might see. It's a SIM card, right? So it's a SIM card. What pins does a SIM card have? Well, we've got a SIM, we've got a voltage pin, power, we've got a reset pin, that just tells it to reset. Clock, ground, NC, which is no connect, and a data pin. It's kind of similar to what I just showed you, right? So that's what a SIM card looks like. That's a micro, eSIM. That's an eSIM right next to it. So I've got a couple of those. Can't really find them at the moment on Mouser, but yeah, they're pretty much exactly the same pin out as a real SIM card, except you can programmatically program them. Now the question is, are they equal? Do they, can they sit in the same spot as a SIM card? And the correct answer is, we'll go have a look on DigiKey and Mouser and have a look ourselves, because you can actually go in and check out all the diagrams. You can actually see certain pinouts and things like that, and we can go and get PDFs. So an example here is this, M2M embedded SIM, low cost, anywhere, MQTT, blah, blah, blah. But what you'll see here is an actual thing there, which some of you might recognize, but this is a form factor. MF2 is a generic form factor for SIM cards, eSIM cards. Totally irrelevant for anything other than just doing SIM cards. But this next thing here, QFN8, that will come in handy, and we'll explain why shortly. This is a diagram of a SIM card. Most of it's irrelevant, except for this part here, which is just the pinout. And I want to draw your attention to the fact that there are 8 pins on the left side and only 5 pins on the right side. So what you'll notice is most pins aren't actually even used. So it's literally exactly the same as a real SIM. It's just there's unused pins. So unused pins are the NCs. That's what I showed you before. The NC means no connect. And then sometimes they're actually included for future use. But generically, that rarely ever happens because they tend to just release a new chip or a new board prior to that anyway. So they rarely ever get reused. That's a really in-depth explanation that probably is irrelevant. But if you want to have a look at the slides later and sort of capstone the knowledge, it might make more sense. I'm pretty sure I've mentioned everything there, but some of the reserve ones, they're optional use for USB, but that would be prophetically stupid to do that because it sounds like something that would introduce attack vectors. So another one, what about an SD card versus a SIM card? You know, do they sound sort of similar? We're probably looking for what? We're looking for voltage, a clock maybe, a data in, data out, maybe a ground pin. And what do you know? We got chip select as well. We got everything. So VSS and VSS. VSS is actually ground. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, ground in a SIM card. So I'll tell you something special about SIM cards shortly. But the same stuff that I showed you earlier. We've got a data pin, ground pin, chip selector. You know, we've got a plus, which is voltage. Looks pretty similar to a SIM card to me. And then we've got another version of an SD card. This is like the super speed one or the ultra speed one. You know, they keep going like ultra class, ultra one, like it just keeps going forever. And the reason that keeps going is they just add more data lines. That's literally what they do. They just keep adding data lines. So if you think about, you know, some of the newest SD cards, you see, so the difference there between an SPI one and an SD one or an MMC one, they just add more data lines. I don't think I really see the one on the far right because nobody really implemented it. But that one there you'll see all the time. Another example, USB 3. This probably looks super complex, but if we zoom in, what is a USB 3? Well, it's just USB 2 with 2 extra data lines. We've got a double RX, double TX, and that's all it is. It's 2 extra data lines. That's why it's faster. Just more data lines, faster. But they're all similar, right? You kind of start seeing it's got a clock, data, ground, positive, and then it just keeps going. That's it. That's all there is in IT, in hardware hacking. Yeah, I could finish the talk right here, right? So another example, you know, a lot of you guys will know this one, right? So PCI, they just keep doubling the number of data lines, right? That's exactly what happens. And I'll give you an example of how relevant the clock and everything is look at this. The little 18 pin or 16 pin thing. Oh, we got voltage, we got input, output, clock, we got a reset, no connect. All the stuff I've been talking about previously, some other random stuff that probably doesn't, and reserved as well. It never gets used. But that's so relevant because it's exactly what I've just shown you. Like all this stuff is relatively exactly the same. And what's different about all this stuff? SD cards, USB sticks, SPI flash, eMMC, all this stuff. And the answer is literally nothing. They're practically, and I will show you how nothingly similar they are. So that's a SanDisk USB card. It's a pretty mouthful to say because USB-C stick doesn't make sense, does it? If you pull it apart, you see this chip. It's a little bit rectangular. It's got, I'll tell you how many pins it's got. It's got 24 pins on one side and 24 on the other side. It's got 48 pins, okay? That's got a lot of data lines, right? A lot of data lines compared to the other ones. And let's open up a SD card. So some SD cards are different. They got they're just like miniature SD cards, just cramped into the top end. But this is like one of those ones where you can see some cool stuff going on. And in fact, you'll see the same chip. Like, oh, wow, that's exactly the same as what I just saw then, isn't it? So this one plugs in the SD card slot. And if we go sub 2010 SSDs, we'll see exactly the same thing. We've got the same style chip, 48 pins on the sides. Starting to see the pattern here. And the pattern is, it's the same chip. So these are all the same attack vector, the same series of ideas. You know what I mean? Like they got exactly the same pin out, exactly the same sort of attack vector. It's just this one, they're just a little bit different. So the actual name of the chip is TSOP48, which means thin, small outline package. And that means it's thin and it's small and it's a small outline package. That's quite literally what it means. And you'll find it's quite funny when we get into the logical naming of things. They're actually relatively, you know, it's actually logical. Makes sense. Hardware hacking involves identifying what's on the board. And that's kind of what we're getting at here. It's just plugging stuff into the right thing. That, like I said, it's a recurring theme. It's just identifying what's on the board, what have I got, the inventory, what's there on the board, what can I touch, what can I play with. And you'll find that TSOP, where is it? It's probably not here actually, but, it's up the top. See, it's TSOP 48. These are all very, very similar. Some of them, we'll get into what they're naming soon, but they're all progressed towards the next side. This is one at the top, dip, which is the old school one with the big long legs. You'll barely ever see that because it's really hard for the factory to automate that. They've got to flip the PCB over and solder it, or by hand. But you'll find the newer ones, it's really easy because they can just print it on there automatically. You've probably seen it in documentaries and whatnot, and they just heat it up and it's stuck to the board. So identifying chips is simple, and I'll show you how to do it. You just count how many pins there are, and if it's 2 sides or if it's 4 sides. So, and do the legs go through the board? And like I said, the legs ones are pretty rare now. So yeah, that's really stuff that's probably not worth hacking, if that makes sense. Does it have leads at all? They're called legs or leads, whatever you want to call them. And I'll show you through a worked example. This is a router from a solar inverter. And you might start to recognize we've got a long chip with 2 sides. I just lost something there. We've got one with 4 sides. We've got a bunch of stuff down there, a bunch of stuff up the top. And we're going to go through this and just quickly, roughly show you exactly how to quickly scope it out. Let's pick out, what do we got? We've got a couple of different types of things here. We've got ball grids, standard outlines, and then we've got quads, which is 4 sides. So if it's got 2 sides, it's probably going to be S something, O something. If it's got balls underneath, it's going to be BGA. If it's got 4 sides, it's going to be quad. And it's flat, quad flat, and that's all there is. There's a quad flat, thin, small ball grid array, and that's practically all you'll see on generic modern stuff. So same thing, small outline, yeah. 7 chips on this board. We've got a small outline one, it's got 2 sides. We've got a quad flat in the middle, probably another small outline down the bottom right. And then we've probably got that's probably like a power MOSFET at the top, but there's 2 ones up the top with like 2 sides as well, but they're kind of small. We'll get into those ones. One of them says wind bond on it as well. This slide's really laggy, so it's going to take a second or 2 to load. So I cropped the pictures. Oh, there it is. So there's 7 chips. Now, that's all there is pretty much functionally on this board. And there's 3 in the bottom package, but that bottom package is a separate thing by itself. And disregard the 4-pin hole on it, which is obviously probably UART, but there's no other side to the board. It's stuck flush to the board. So yeah, you can't really hook into that. You can probably stuff something in there and just solder it, but it's getting really laggy because this is a really big image. Just these 2 slides. There it is, yeah. OS is probably on this one. That's probably the CPU. The boot sector, you've probably seen this on a motherboard, right? The little wind bond little chip, little SPI flash. We've got a probably power MOSFET, this Wi-Fi board, big chunky thing. Different color to the rest of the board, right? So thin, small outline, SOP 28. So what would you use to hack that? Well, we just get the socket for an SOP 28. Or we just get the little clamp that goes on there live. You can live clamp on there without taking it off. We've got quad flat. So quad flat package, 64 pins. Well, I wonder what that's probably STM32. You've probably heard of that before, right? And if it's got no legs, it's called no leads or no leads. So QF no leads. QF package with leads, QF no leads. This one, like I said, you'll never see it before. You will barely see it, the old style dip. Now, wind bond. So this is where we get into the hacking, right? So a wind bond chip, you may or may not know that's probably got your boot sector on there. Or in the case of, for example, John Deere, that's where they stored the serial number. So I'll just have a quick water. And you'll see a bit of a mess on the board. That's because they put this epoxy resin on there, and it was a complicated exercise. And the balls on that one, we got a 100 grid array, so that's a 100 BGA 100. And I actually have the socket for that, not with me, but that's exactly how I hacked the John Deere. I just wrote to the chip, took it off the board, wrote to it, put it back on. Now this little chip here, the little 8-legged thing, that actually gets mounted on the OS as dev EEPROM, right? So it's quite literally just the read only. But if I take it off the board and hook up to it, I can write to it. It's no longer read only, is it? So that was the improvised way of doing it. And I like to think of it like there's a time sync way of doing it, and then there's a smart way of doing it. Hook onto it with a proper clamp. You can just hook up to it. You don't actually have to take it off the board. But if you're strapped for time, you improvise. Improvise. This is actually an ESP32 board that I stuck it onto, and it just had really nicely spaced pads that I could evenly hook up to. All those pins are wrong, by the way. All those labels are all wrong. But it got me the job done. I got to this guy's website, this GitHub project with 4 stars. I think it had like 2 stars when I found it. And yeah, I just banged it out. Just wrote it's a little Arduino script. It says, at this address, print what's there, and just goes through that. And I print it all out. And I did it. It's so crude that I was printing out, the name of the address and the data was there. And then I would go and chuck it into a text file or xtump it or whatever. And if you look there, it says PA15 PGM A0. I think the endianness is wrong as well as back to front, but that's the serial number of the device. And you can actually perform an attack where if you change the serial number, you can use someone else's activation codes to unlock services that you've paid for. It's quote. I'll just stress that as well. So there's a UART hole there, but it's actually, like I said, it's flush to the board, so there's no holes on the back. You could probably drill holes through, but I've done that before, and I don't recommend it because there's usually a big ground plane there, and and then everything's connected to ground and it's screwed up. So another example of those little flush little boards that stick out is this one here, this little Wi-Fi adapter there. See that little big chunky thing there? Big chunky square. It's got 1, 2, 3 flat. It's flat to the board. It's got 2 sides. This is a really custom package right there. But this is actually a Wi-Fi chip. It's like an external Wi-Fi chip. And if you actually take this off, you'll notice something, right? It's got ground, RF, antenna stuff, 3.3 volts, and then U plus and U minus. Well, I think the U actually stands for USB. So it's a USB device. So we've actually got a USB port just hanging on the side of the board. If you take that off, you can actually hook straight into it with USB. Some of them are actually UART. So if there's no pin out on the board for UART, you can just take off chips that actually connect to UART and then just have a root shell straight in, depending what board it is, obviously. But some boards, I've done exactly that and gone straight in like that. Not this one, because I believe it's USB, but there's other ways to do it. Another way, this is another port that you might recognize. It was missing on the board. It wasn't actually, there was nothing there. It's an SD card slot. So you can actually plug in your SD card slot there. The reason I've got LOL there is it probably boots from this automatically if you put something there. So, if you put your own SD card slot on there, which is pretty easy to do, you can expand the disk space on the router, or you can probably just boot from that sector as well. That's what the BGA looks like underneath, not exposed. It's not exciting. That's me reballing it. One of the most annoying experiences you'll ever have as a hardware hacker is reballing things, because these are 0.3 millimeters, and I think that's like what, 1/1,000,000th of an inch. I don't know imperial, but yeah, it's small. So BGA pins are not exposed as well. That's something you'll need to know. Is you can't see these pins from the outside, and that's pretty cool and all, but you can usually get in different ways. So how would you actually get in like that? So you can either find where the pins go to on the board, or you can take the chip off and just read right to it like that. And in fact, there's sockets for that. So you can just take it off, and you might recognize something here too. We've got BGA 63. It's probably got 63 balls. It's probably ball grid array. TSOP 56. It's probably thin, small, outline. It's probably got 56 pins. Maybe that was 28 in each side. 48 BGA. It's probably the same thing. And then you just this starts to make sense, hopefully, in your brain. It sort of starts to build itself into together. And if you go online and you look up chips, you'll notice they all name them like this. And sometimes they'll disagree. Like a thin, small outline might be, they'll just write SOP. Like they're like, oh. And if in doubt, you can just literally type in IC 48 legs, like IC, SOIC, or if it's quad flat IC number of legs, and it will just find it for you, usually. Or narrow it down, for starters. So this thing here, you'll start to recognize, hopefully, who kind of gets an idea of what they're looking at now. We've probably got 2 big ball grid arrays. There's a couple of flat things. So like here, for example, this little chip here, it's 4 sides. It's got no leads, because they're not like sticking out, the leads. It's just, they're like little cavities. And in fact, there's probably nothing on this board with leads, because it's so small, right? This is like, small. Like I said, four slides, flat, no leads. And I'll let you cheat. Here's a really good photo of one too. So SK Hynix, we'll get to that one in a sec, but what's this one? So let's start with the one in between the 2 big chips, right? We've got this little one here, the 1446 dead. It's actually not dead. I think it's something else. It's like BE. But that is a 14661E TI 003. oh, and you can go and find it. It's actually BEAC, but I think it's just a different version of it. But whatever it is, we can find exactly what it is. We can go onto Mauser, and it turns out it's a Maxim integrated multiplexer switch of some description. There's the other versions of it in the different packages that we were talking about earlier. These ones have legs on them. Leads, but I like to call them legs. Too quick. There's a ball grid version, little tiny one. More legs, and then no legs. What I mean by legs, it's got little divots, little cavities you can solder to. And actually on that page, you can go and click this button here, PCB symbol, footprint, and a 3D model. Now, I think I had 3D turned off, or what's called WebGL for some reason. But you can actually have a little spinny version of it. You can play with it. It's pretty irrelevant. But you get this footprint, and you get this one on the far left, which is symbol. And we'll go through these real quick, but you might start to recognize a few things. We've got this is probably a chip select style thing between, I want to run it in SPI, I want to run it in I2C, I2C, and then we might recognize some stuff here as well. We've got VCC, we've got ground, we've got some clocks, we've got a chip select, we've got data in, DA, data out, A1, all this stuff. It just keeps going, right? You've got the same sort of stuff, all this random stuff, AB0, these are all just general purpose stuff, irrelevant to us, but probably relevant to Maxim. But stuff that we might connect to, we might connect some sort of SPI stuff to that side and try and hack it. We can take it off, hook in. We can also have a look at this side. We've got COM A, COM B. That's probably UART. Like, I'm not going to lie. COM A or COM ports, they're probably UART. A may be in, B may be out, There's only one way to find out, and just touch it. Just put some leads up to it. Just touch it. So SK Hynix, popular BGA manufacturer. iPhone uses them, for example. This is a 153 package. It's got 153 balls underneath, and pretty easy to find this one. As you can see, I spelt it wrong because I couldn't read it. It told me what it was. It says H9HK, and it probably looks like H9. I think I typed H9NK or something, but it came up and told me what it was, thankfully. And it's the same sort of package that you'll find. This is a little bit different. It's like this is 140 something, I think. But that's an SSD. So if you open up an SSD, you'll find exactly the same stuff. Ball grids, another ball grid up there, all of the little resistors and capacitors, probably irrelevant to a hardware hacker. The other side, exactly the same stuff. John Deere as well. That's a 153 ball as well. That's me taking it off. And you'll notice how many pins are unused. So out of 153 balls, there's they're only using 20 of them, right? And I think the reason they use the 153 is because they've got so much room for future use. They can just keep adding more pins in there as they get bigger and bigger. If you want to test this out, want to practice it, you can go down to your local phone shop and just say, give me a box of dead Androids. And they'll give you $20. You can get an old box of like 2012 models, and you can just practice on them, practice taking stuff off, practice ripping them off. And these are exactly the same setups as the HoloLens I was showing you earlier. That one's a bit corroded. That's what happens when you do it wrong. If you push too hard, it breaks it off, and you can actually see that's the actual chip underneath, and it's broken, dead. So give me a sec. So that's beyond repair, totally nuked. Now, once you get that chip off the board, what do you do? And what do you do? I want to write to it. I want to read it. I want to modify it. So you got these chips, these sockets. Now, these brands here, Infineon, Intel, Qualcomm, these are all the compatibility brands. They don't work with them whatsoever. These are all the compatibilities. So SK Hynix, Toshiba, Huawei, Samsung's there. Yeah, of course they are. And you can go in and look, I want a QFP, I want a quad flat package, I want a QFN package one, I want a BGA one, all these other ones, and all the eMMCs on the far right. eMMCs are the big ball ones like these ones. These are all the eMMCs. Really popular modern chips. A lot of RAM, a lot of storage. They go up to 256 gigabytes, obviously. Top right one, most common one you'll see on modern stuff. I think I was playing with Google Home, that's got one. HoloLens has one, we were just looking earlier. I haven't taken it off the board, but as I said, I showed you, I can go onto the website, Mauser, and pick up the actual diagram, and it'll tell me exactly. These are universal chip readers for 153 ball sockets. And you can just buy that and just plug it straight in, read, write, and then you can just modify the OS or download it and run it through Ghidra. So any other certain random packages that you have never heard of, you can just go and get them from this package here, RT809H. It's very common. just ball grid array package. It'll just show up. Like I said, these are all the little bit older chips, a little bit less likely to be seen in modern hackable, bug bountyable hardware. Like I think it's a bit laggy. So yeah, there we go. So the best attack, what would you probably go in first? So we've identified what's on the board. I think the best way to go in would just be go through UART here. We've got a bit of UART. That 4-pin one, we've got a 5-pin one. 5-pin one, I don't know, probably something other. Probably got something with a clock. But the 4-pin one, let's bring it up to the light. And there's actually a cheat, by the way. If you bring it up to the lamp, you can actually see through the board. And if you do it, you have to do it both sides, but you can actually get a full-blown diagram of what's going on. And you can see 2 of the pins are connected from both those sides. But another weak spot that I would connect to would be this WinBond chip. You can't read it, but if it's on italics and it says WBond on it or something, it's WinBond. It stores a little bit of SPI flash. And that's really easy to clamp onto, like I showed you earlier. So some of the things you can do with little WinBond, little BIOS chip, where you can bypass the software security checks. If it was secure boot, you could remove it, replace it with like something else. If it was a U-boot, you could destroy it and do whatever. If it was a serial number, you can change that. You can, maybe you can tell it to boot from a different external media, all sorts of stuff. And that device shows up later on mounted, as read-only in the device, but you've got write access if you're hooking into it manually. Let's have another look. So small ICs, I think we'll skip through a couple of these slides, make sure we've got enough time. Getting the right tool for the job is important. So not destroying boards is important too, because you can imagine how much the HoloLens is. Like, I've never hacked one because they're like, $5,000 on eBay or something like that. A little bit different when you work at Microsoft, you can play with these, but there's also time sinks and damage. This is a time sink way of hooking up to an eMMC. It's the old way of doing it. This is probably the legacy way or something. Someone spent a lot of time meticulously hooking up to this. This was probably great work when it was done. And, I commend, I think the guy there was ripitapart.com. Yep. And the future model was this one. We got like the Miracle ISP tool. We've got support BGA, ball grid arrays, BGA, blah, 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 different numbers. And the new way is just, we've got a universal socket now. And that's actually an SD card on the other end of it. And then, we'll just do a USB 3 one. We've got little links on it. We've got little things, and we've got little switches at the back. We can change the voltage. And that's literally all you need. You don't have to do any of this crazy wire stuff now. You don't have to touch this. You don't even have to do that. You just take it off. It's a bit complicated to take it off, but we won't talk about that today. But we are talking about it. How would you get it off? Because it's really tight. See, it's really next to the edge of the board. How would you get that off? Well, first of all, it's got black glue underneath it. And that's that Gorilla Glue that you find when if you've replaced an iPhone screen before, it's got like this really thick glue that needs heat. So first of all, you get rid of that. John Deere loves using that stuff. And you'd get flux. Now, this is trash flux, by the way. And this flux will destroy your board. It's not designed for this sort of board. This is kind of the theme about getting the right tool for the job. So this is the wrong tool for the job. This is soldering with like a blowtorch. This is like a car radiator, I assume so. Ugly radiator as well. And he's repaired it multiple times. So he's made a good job. It's, macro soldering. It's different to micro soldering. This is hardcore flux. So if you have, you go down to your local hardware shop, you ask for a soldering iron, flux, and solder. They'll probably give you this one, the one that does this stuff. But this is hardcore flux for like, this heavy rosin flux. Stinky, toxic probably as well. Caustic as well. Probably, you would probably die if you inhale it. And this is the one I like to use, Amtech. They're made for literally, aerospace. They actually have a really limited retail market because I think they literally just do defense stuff. You get the MSDS, they've got Tachyflux, they glow in the dark. That's just for counterfeiting. Distinct inside. They actually had a problem last year. It's funny, you can Google it. It's about Amtech drama about them. There was someone on the Amazon had the wrong one. And they've got complicated flux. Look, handcraft rosin fluxes for automotive. And then on the far right, you've got high pitch. High pitch means really, really small pins or really, really small distances between chips. Like cotton candy scent, QC tracer. And I can tell you right now, it actually smells really good. It smells better than the toxic ones. If it's high pitch, it's generally good for little things like HoloLens. That's what my fridge looks like at home. I've got a nice selection of Amtech fluxes and some other counterfeit ones. Like that one's Eakins, but it's 559, and the other one, the Amtech, is the actual owner. Well, not owner, they just name it 559, but 559 V3 TF. That works great. And if you're looking for just a generic flux, just type in SMD, like little high pitch flux or something like that, or Amtech best flux for PCBs or something. It should pop up. Soldering irons, the right tool for the right job. So these are USB ones. I actually like the USB ones because they've got really, really small tips and you can get really, really small little little bits of heat. However, if you look at the one on the left, it's massive, right? How am I supposed to how am I supposed to get little changes to a board without such a chunky little thing? And in fact, I'm going to go through some soldering tips here. Most of these are garbage, except for a couple of them. And the one on the far right is the one you'll generally see, the one that you see from stock images, soldering iron, just a little pointy tip. But the best ones for PCBs are debatable between people, but it's the chisel tip, which is just not the knife one. There's a knife one, and you've got a chisel tip. Then you've got a little chisel tip where you can confidently see there's a massive surface area you can touch onto the board, right? And if you look at the surface area, the far right, there's like a little tip, like you can barely touch anything. And that's actually for connecting wires together, generally. And then there's another one, bevel tip, which is actually quite cool as well. It's got a little flat edge as well. And the benefits of a chisel tip is you can actually store solder in that bevel, in that chisel, based on the wetting, of the surface tension of the solder. It will actually stick there, and that doesn't happen on a conical tip. It will just slide off. That's just a cool close-up of a dirty old soldering iron covered with a little bit of flux on the end. A little bit of solder. And it's totally, totally different, leagues different to this sort of stuff. And I'll give you an example of me using it on a really small board. That's a USB, I think it's like an Android TV. Yeah, 3 minutes. Yeah. It's an Android TV stick. And you can see those two little tiny dots there is what I was able to connect to and get a root shell. And it was running ADB and root, just auto connect. It was a joke. I got a CV on that one, I think, as well, just because it was a joke. It shouldn't have been in production, to be honest. Because people sign into their Netflix and bank and Gmail and stuff on their TVs. And you can just hook up to it with a root shell. So yeah, another thing is too much damage, too much heat, right tool for the right job sort of thing. Bad soldering, you get smoke, these are damages as well, or dangers that you can have. Connecting the wrong pins, you get blown up boards, you get the magic smoke that comes out, and that tends to happen. Another important thing is reducing risk. We're on the home stretch here. So this is a power socket, and this is 120 volt to 240 volt stuff, high voltage. Who would think about putting a smart socket together? I don't know, personally. But yeah, it's got some usage to it. What's that? We've got a quad flat thing. It's probably hard to see on the screen, but I'm going to zoom in for you. There it is, quad flat. It's probably really dark, but it's a Realtek, a little crab like this, right? Realtek. Quad flat, I think it's like 48 or like 96 pins or something. But yeah, we can go and download the thing for that. You probably recognize a few pins, but we're running out of time. But that's an example of it hooked up to one of those little external chips that goes onto a board, and you can probably fit that in exactly the same spot as the other one. Another example of reducing risk is holding it up to the light, making sure you're using the right hole. Example here is big plane. So we get a big thing here. If you want to identify pins from this board, if it's got 3 little pins that come out, it's probably connecting to ground, which is the big area. If there's an isolated area, it's a plus. And if there's 2 little ones by themselves, that's probably the receive and transmit lines. And you can just keep that in your head for later, like big ground. That's 240 volt reduction. We've got a minute left. Next slide. 240 volt risk reduction. So this would connect to a power outlet, but I removed the ability to do that. And in fact, I've actually connected it up to a 5 volt little battery now. So I've totally mitigated getting electric shock from the wall and made it very, very safe. So a lot of devices are still pretty dangerous when you unplug them from the wall because they have massive capacitors. This is a TCL TV. I electrocuted myself on this. And the top right, it's in Thai for starters, pretty hard to read. On the top right, there's 2 fat capacitors, 120 volts. They're not deathly, might the what's it called, let go perspective, whatever it is, but I could have, if I hold it, I was holding it with my left finger and my right finger, and it went just like a little U there. But if I was holding it in one hand, the other hand, it's probably going to go through my heart. But yeah, I was fine. I just dropped it, had the let go thing, and I think we're like right in the end. Yeah, and you see big gaps, hot, cold. That generally means very dangerous. If it's got hot cold there, it means like do not touch this at all when it's on. Even when it's off, it's still pretty unsafe. I think we're just on the home little stretch here. Got a couple of slides left. That's that reminding you again, the let go or the respiratory paralysis thing, or just make sure you don't get above that because you might die. Expensive hardware, like I mentioned, it can do damage to the board. An example of this is John Deere. I made a mess of that board when I was playing with it. Still nothing of interest on that little UART there they had. Didn't really give me anything noticeable. That's the BGA 100. That's what gave me the best data from it, and I was able to put certain games on there. I'll just quickly run through these because I think I'm out of time. But root password unknown. One path is to say, oh yeah, so I had this little, this is in a previous talk that I did with John Deere about jailbreaking then Tractor, but bringing up a root terminal. That talk's on YouTube, did a DEF CON, pretty viral. I've actually got it here with me, I've got it here with me if you want to play with it later. But yeah, it runs Doom, root shell. So my favorite way as well is to buy two devices, especially if they're expensive. Buy two devices, one device you can pull apart, destroy, mess with, beyond repair. The other one you can keep and keep it as a stock state to sort of play with properly. And this will finish up with this, but this is the emerging stuff, is bringing out the OS once you've got it off that disk, opening it up in Ghidra, and you can, I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but you can actually use ChatGPT in Ghidra now. So there's plugins now. This is D-Link as well. So D-Link had D-Link had a megaton of vulns the other day. I think they use PHP for their backend as well, which is nothing wrong with PHP. Love it. Just got to write it perfectly. So this is just random stuff. I was like, define main for me in a ChatGPT Ghidra tool, and it goes, oh yeah, sends it through and goes, this function is the main function of the WWM call, which is a tool for managing wireless. It just tells you exactly what it is. And this is like hardware from a device. You have nothing, like you've just ripped it off and just gone, oh, right click, explain. And it tells you exactly what to do. If the name does not match any of these functions, it will print an error message. That's probably some way to look at, right? And it's really cool. If you do that for all the functions, you pretty much get a really good idea of what's going on the PCB. And I'll finish up now. Reminder: ID what's on the board, connect what you think you can connect to, and just don't do any damage to the board. And thanks for listening.